More with Kirk McElhearn on taking control of your Apple Media apps. This is Mac Voices. Mac Voices is brought to you by the 2024 MacVoices Holiday Gift Guide. Gift ideas to give and get from all your Mac Voices friends. Hardware, coffee, bags, you never know what will be picked, but they're all great. Find our gift guide shows in the feeds or visit the master list of gift guide picks in the blog section of the Mac Voices website at macvoices.com. Which actually is something I wanted to ask you about. Do you cover the books or audiobooks app in this Take Control book?
I cover the books app mainly to talk about audiobooks because ebooks are pretty simple. You tap a book, you swipe to change pages. There's really no explanation you need. Audiobooks are a little bit different because there are lots of features. There are ways that you can add your own audiobooks, which have gotten more difficult. One thing I will say, though, as a longtime Audible user, if you're an Audible subscriber, use the Audible apps. Don't try to put your books into the Apple's Books apps. First of all, they won't sync. You'll be able to play them on your Mac, but they won't sync to your other devices. Audible's iPhone and iPad app is really good. And if you're an Audible user and you're listening and you have an Apple Watch and you spent years of frustration trying to get books to sync to your Apple Watch, the Audible app on Apple Watch now works because it doesn't sync, but it streams. Audible came out with this horrible app for years. They kept iterating. The only way you could sync a book was you had to put your watch on a charger and you had to wait. And you know how slow it is sometimes to sync a backup from your phone? Well, it's the same for audiobooks. It was terrible. It was horrible to think that an Amazon company couldn't do better than that. So finally this year, they released an app that streams instead of syncing. My guess is it streams what it can without streaming the entire book. I don't even know if you can actually download a book to the app on the watch. You can on the phone. And I would guess that in that case, it would be getting it from the phone if you don't have cellular data or whatever on the watch. I'm not really sure, but I have listened to audiobooks on my watch, well, with headphones from my watch with the Audible app, and it's excellent.
Honestly, I did not know there was an Audible Apple Watch app. I will be checking that out because I'd usually, if I'm listening to an audiobook through Audible on a mobile basis with my headphones, I'm doing it from my phone. So didn't even know about the watch.
Well, that's the case for most people. I mean, the only advantage is you can put your phone down and not have it next to you and maybe not get annoyed by, notifications, but you can always put do not disturb on. So it's rare that I don't have my phone with me if I want to listen to an audiobook, but there are people who want to go out, leave their phone at home, just have their watch, pop your headphones in, and you can listen.
So this has been a great transition because that's the next place I wanted to go. I know you said there's not to say a lot to say about the Apple Watch, but how do you feel? We just talked about Audible, but how do you feel about music, podcasts, and that kind of thing on the watch?
So obviously the watch with its screen size and, limited interface is a lot different from the other apps, but it's actually not that different. With the music app, the only thing you can't do is access the section that's called New. That used to be Browse. So that would be how you can view everything on Apple Music. But you can view your home screen, which shows recommendations, what you've listened to lately, etc. You can sync music to the watch. You can basically search through your entire library. It's really, I really like the Apple Watch. I always wear it, but it's not really meant to be a perfect tool for anything like that. You can use it like that. I can sit out in my backyard for Americans, with my phone inside, with my AirPods like you've got in your ears, and listen to music on my watch, from my watch, just as I can listen to audiobooks and podcasts and all that. It's always going to be difficult because of the size of the display, but I think Apple's done a pretty good job in designing these apps to fit with a scrolling display, because that's the main interface element on the watch, is scrolling as opposed to swiping or clicking.
So that's I don't know, that's a multiple number of times you've talked about the display aspect of these things. And so is there any improvement you think that would jump out at you for any of the screen sizes for any of the apps that could be made? Because again, we started out this conversation by saying these are pretty mature apps. And I don't want them, please do not, Apple, please do not make changes just to make changes. But is there anything that would enhance the experience, you think, with just a little more evolution?
I'm just looking at my phone and see, the thing is, over a few years, I've really gotten used to the phone display, the phone interface. So I wouldn't want too many changes. Um, the only thing that you can't do on the phone is with the iPad in the music or the TV app, if you touch and hold the tab bar, you can edit what's in the tab bar. So you can move things from the sidebar to the tab bar so you can have your own selection of things. You can't do this in the tab bar on the iPhone. You're a little bit more limited, but there's not enough space to be able to do that. There's only 5 icons. They can only have short text, so they don't want to let you do that. I think I'll tell you where they can improve, and that's Siri. Siri is pretty much as dumb as a rock. They announced some new Siri feature, natural language queries, where you can make any combination of mood and activity and genre and decade and all that. So I said, hey, Siri, play me some 70s rock for a road trip. And it started playing some new rap song because it had the word road in it or something. It's like, maybe it hasn't fully rolled out. This was part of the 18.2 and 15.2 Apple Intelligence release this week. Maybe it's just not active yet. Siri is just, I want to say I just woke up my phone there. Go away. Siri is just annoying and pretty much useless. One thing I do want to mention, and you didn't mention it yet, is the classical music app, the Apple Music Classical app, which they released in 2023 for iPhone, a little bit later for iPad. And that's really interesting. I'm one of the few people who ever wrote about iTunes and classical music, and I wrote a number of articles and columns in Macworld about that. And the fact that Apple did that for what is 1 or 2% of the music industry in the world, it's surprising. But even more surprising is that they didn't design it in-house. They bought an app from a company called Primephonic, a Dutch company that had developed their own streaming service. Even more surprising, most people don't know about this one, they bought a Swedish record label called BIS Records, BIS, about a year ago, a little bit less, a little bit more. Very well-respected classical music label with its own specific niche of content. And a lot of independent classical labels are like that. They focus on specific things. I have no idea why they bought that. They're not rolling it into any Apple product. Since I've written a lot about classical music, I know the guy who runs the label fairly well. I mean, he's in his 70s, so he wasn't going to continue too much. I don't understand. Someone at Apple likes classical music. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made the classical music app. They wouldn't have bought a classical music label, which is really strange. Classical music app has its quirks. It includes a lot of music that's not classical. And it's Apple's definition of classical. When I see records by Brian Eno there, I love Brian Eno, but he is not classical music. There are other sort of ambient / electronic / neoclassical type performers in there, like Nils Frams and Olaf what's his name? Olafur Anders, whatever. He's an Icelandic composer. I can never remember his name. It's a bit weird the way they've added music like that. And this is Apple who's determined that these are considered to be classical music. It's also a bit confusing because it overlaps with your Apple Music library. So anything that Apple considers classical that's in your Apple Music library is duplicated in your Apple Music Classical library. Anything you add to your Apple Music Classical library is also added to your Apple Music library. They're separate but not equal, and I find this confusing. And to be honest, I never use it. Whenever I listen to classical music, I just use the plain music app. It's much easier to work with. One app instead of two. Don't tell anyone I don't use it though.
Yes, it's our secret. I'm glad you brought up the classical because honestly, I'm not a classical music person, so I tend to
I
forget
know you're
about
a
that completely.
metalhead.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's beside the point. But the whole idea, I mean, because when they started talking about trying to integrate classical music with what was then iTunes, it's like, does this really fit? Because there are aspects of classical that and collections of classical, and then there's the issue of composer versus performer, which isn't quite the same, I don't think, for most of the music that was in iTunes and is now in music.
It
So
didn't not fit, but you had to do workarounds, hence the articles I wrote about iTunes and classical music. But you can add a composer to any music in iTunes, or the music app. You can add, there are certain tags. They added what they call work and movement tags. This might go back to iTunes 12 or 11 even. So a work is, let's say, I'm going to pick Charles Ives' Second Piano Sonata, Concord Sonata. That's the name of the work. It has four movements entitled Alcott Emerson. Now I should get this right because I know this really well. I was just listening to it. Anyway, it's got four movements named after famous people from Concord in the 19th century. So you have the work and the movements instead of saying an album and tracks, because on an album with this piano sonata, which is 20, 25 minutes long, you're going to have something else. So with the work and movement tags, which you can see in the Apple Music Classical app, it makes it easier to organize classical music. Still not perfect in the music apps or as it was in iTunes. Not that perfect easily either in the Apple Music Classical app, because yes, you think in terms of works, but you also think in terms of collections. Let's say all of Beethoven's piano sonatas. Or you think in terms of a recital that has three Beethoven piano sonatas selected by a pianist. So it's it's a hexagonal peg in a round hole. It sort of fits, but it's like I've seen other apps that people have created, either beta versions that never got released or final versions of apps that were designed to work better with classical music. And there's always this problem of, you know what a pivot table is in Excel?
sure.
The kind of
Mhm.
thing where you change the view and the things change. It's like three-dimensional. And that's the problem with classical music, that you've got multiple entry points. You've got composer, you've got work, you've got artist, you've got performer, because you can have a symphony and a soloist, right? So you've got multiple entry points, which makes it really hard to deal with.
Thank you for that. You just educated me a lot to the classical music app, which I think I've only ever launched once. So,
Well, if you're only into, metal, then you're not going to want the classical music app, and it's understandable. I wish they would have a jazz app as well. And the difference with jazz is that you do sometimes care about the composer, because a lot of jazz music is what we would call covers and rocks, or so standard. What's called jazz standards are songs that people have performed in many versions over time. So, best example is John Coltrane, "My Favorite Things." The song from, is it The Sound of Music? He did his 18-minute version on one of his albums in the 60s. So that's a song by whoever wrote it, interpreted by the performer. And sometimes people are looking for let's say all Miles Davis tunes that other performers have covered, right? It's relatively normal in jazz for jazz performers in a concert or even an album to be playing songs they've written combined with songs that other people have written. So a jazz app would be interesting because it would give you quicker access to the jazz section of Apple Music, and it would allow you to group together all the jazz recordings and search them differently.
so maybe there is a little bit of room for evolution. Would you see that? Would you prefer to see that broken out as a separate app, or would you prefer to see that as another view into your Apple Music
Well,
library?
so here's the thing. The classical music app exists on iPhone and iPad, but there's no equivalent on the Mac in the music app. There's no classical section in the sidebar. And that's a bit problematic. And I understand why they're doing it, because the way you approach classical music makes more sense as a separate app. Um, could they have a jazz view? It depends. If you want composer, you, you may want to find all the recordings where Thelonious Monk was a sideman in someone else's groups. That's another thing that jazz people like to do. Like, who did he play with? That wasn't his band, but someone else's band. And you want to find all the Miles Davis tunes that Thelonious Monk covered, right? That sort of thing. Jazz fanatics, the small minority of people who listen to jazz and are really that fanatic, kind of want that sort of thing. So it wouldn't fit in the current music app, but there wouldn't be enough demand for a separate app, I don't think. And having too many apps like that for different styles of music. Do you want a hip hop app? I mean, you might, like, because you want to organize your stuff. Maybe going forward in 10 or 20 years, that's what they'll do, but I doubt it. Even spinning off classical music, as much as there is a reason for it, seems to be a complication. If they could only change the interface of the app, as you say, in the sidebar, you click or tap classical, I think that would make more sense.
Something I didn't know until you told us is that you put something into either library and it gets copied to the other library.
Yeah.
So that's you have to wonder if at some point do they think they'll merge the two, which really wouldn't be a merging. It would just be a selection of.
Well, they are merged. It's each one is filtering. The main music app has everything, and the classical music app just filters what's considered to be classical music.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's
a bit of a conundrum to me.
Yeah, but you brought up the hip hop and jazz, hip hop jazz. I mean, at what point do you start to say this is just getting to be too much? And again, to your point, there aren't enough people that really want that they can make do with what's there, and still enjoy it and still find it beneficial. Because honestly, I do not know the answer to this. Have you played with Spotify? Does Spotify handle?
I don't use Spotify.
Okay, I don't either.
The biggest, I don't think you can add your own music to your Spotify library, and that's the biggest difference with Apple Music. That you combine your personal library with the streaming library.
Yeah.
I use Spotify a few times here and there, but I just don't like the way they try to force you to, here's all the things we want you to listen to, and I never found searching very efficient. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners or viewers. If Spotify's got better searching than Apple, let me know. I'm really not aware.
Yeah, I'm not a Spotify user.
And there are streaming services that do have better searching, particularly for classical music and jazz. There's Qobuz, which was originally a French company. There's Tidal. There's a few others. They're minority things. They're mostly for people who want high resolution audio. But a lot of them have liner notes, and they have, easier searching, more tags, so you can more easily look at performers and artists and composers, etc. But again, these are for, they have a fraction of the market share of what the big streamers do.
A lot to cover here, Kirk. I do want to ask this question. I often ask this of Take Control authors. Who is this book for? I mean, who do you want to have buy this book?
Chuck, is for you. You can discover all the things you don't know. This book is for someone who's never used Apple Music streaming service and wants to get a handle on it and wants to try it, because let's be honest, you've got access to 100 million tracks for, was it $11 a month now? And even cheaper if you have an Apple One subscription. You can listen to all kinds of music. If you're really into music, you can find all those obscure records by the bands that, you can't find anywhere. I don't know about you. When I was young, there were these rock family trees that appeared in one of these music magazines. So you'd see like these people were in the band, and then these two went off and formed that band and that band. And we'd always want to find, what did they record? You can do that with Apple Music. This book is also for anyone who does have a large music library and has difficulty handling it. I give a lot of tips and present techniques for working with a large music library. My main music library is 70,000 tracks, thousands of ripped CDs. I mean, most of them are ripped CDs, actually. About 4,000 or 5,000 tracks I bought from iTunes over the years, and I don't buy anymore. I even have a second library of other ripped tracks that I never even open anymore. Then there's just too much music. But there are techniques you need to know when you're dealing with that. It's because you have a lot of data that needs to go someplace to be backed up. You can you need to know how to tag it to find when you've got a lot of music, how to search for it. So there's a lot of there's it's the minority of music listeners who are really obsessive about their music libraries, basically. But if you're not obsessive and you still want to learn how Apple Music works, this is a good way to find out. And how does the TV app work? Maybe you've never used it and you want to check out Apple TV Plus. Though between you and me, it's not really that worth it. I mean, in terms of content, they're not very strong, but you can rent movies and you can buy movies and TV shows, and there's a lot of options there. I think it's for anyone who's just got Apple devices and uses media to find out how much more you can do.
I hope that this interview conveys that message, because I've learned several things here that I didn't know,
And you
and
haven't even read the book yet, Chuck.
I haven't read the book yet, but also, I mean, some of those things are just points of interest, like some of the things about the classical music. Others, I will actually go and say, oh, maybe I need to read the book, or at least look this up to see, because maybe the things that I think it should do, maybe it already does. So
Yeah, there's
that's
that
really
too, right? And there are a lot of tips about customizing things, changing the way things work. And as you say, like the music app is a great example. The sidebar in the music app on Mac or on iPad, you can change what displays. Even on iPhone, but it's not the sidebar. It's when you tap library, you can change what displays. Maybe you don't want to display composers' genre compilations because you just don't care about that, but you didn't realize that you could remove them, right? You can remove the iTunes store from the music app on Mac. Now, I think actually it doesn't display by default. I'm not sure. If you have an Apple Music subscription, I think it doesn't display by default anymore in the sidebar. And that's actually quite interesting that the iTunes Store still exists under the name iTunes Store. There's still an iTunes Store app for buying music on iPhone and on iPad. And did you know, Chuck, you can still buy ringtones from Apple?
I think somebody said that the other day, and I'd forgotten all about ringtones.
Ringtones were a multi-billion-dollar business in the early day of cell phones. There used to be an option in the iTunes store, in the iTunes app, to go to ringtones. You would select your music, videos, whatever, and ringtones was one of them. Now, the only way you get to it is you need to go in an iPhone, settings, phone, sounds, and then there's a link to open the Tones store that they call it. I'm not entirely sure about that path, but there's a back way to get in. You can't find it directly from the iTunes Store app anymore, but you can still buy ringtones. I think they're $1.39 each. Go figure.
I guess they're in there. Why not? But
Hey, here's a tip. If you have Audio Hijack, you can make your own ringtones from your own music.
yeah,
Sorry, no, Fission. It's Fission. It's Fission. Sorry.
efficient.
Confuse
Yeah.
the two. Audio Hijack is what you use to record, so you could record some music, but Fission is what you can do to split a track, and then you can create a ringtone file, M4R, I think it is, or something like that, and then you can sync that to your phone. So it's a little bit of work because most people don't sync any device to their Macs anymore, but you can make your own ringtones. I've got a dozen that I made a bunch of years ago, but my phone's always on silent, so I don't care about ringtones. Well,
This has been
I don't
really
want my phone to ring while I'm doing something like this, right?
Yeah, no, I like mine did a minute ago. Yeah, sorry about that. Um, this has been really interesting, and I appreciate it. This is a little bit different kind of take control book, because it covers so many different apps and so many different aspects of things, but I love it. So takecontrolbooks.com is where you go to get this. And Kirk, do you have an idea of what the price is on this?
I think it's $14.99. Don't
Okay.
quote me on that, but I think it's about 250 pages, and I think $14.99 is our highest price.
Okay. Yeah.
Prices
So
are relative to the number of pages, sort of.
right. So again, Take Control Books, that's where you want to go to get Kirk's book, Take Control of Apple Media Apps, along with the other works there from some really great Take Control authors. Kirk, thank you so much. We will do this again before you write the next book. maybe, depending on how far you are on the next book.
And how busy you are. You seem to be quite busy these days with your videos.
Everybody's busy, right? Thanks again, Kirk.
Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm blowing it. I want to make sure that we let people know where else, because writing Take Control books is not all you do. Where else can people find what you do? You
can find me on my website, Kirkville, which conveniently is kirkville.com. That's KIRKVILLE.com. You can find me links to Blue Sky and Mastodon. I post a link to every article I publish and every podcast that I produce as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yep. It's time to take a break. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Once again, TakeControlBooks.com for Kirk's book, Kirkville.com for everything else he does. We'll be back with more soon. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.